Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hear me okay? Yes, hey. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been an amazing week here at SUNY Oneonta, and this morning we're fortunate to have with us one of the people who made our stay here possible. Dr. Alberto Cardeye began his role as the 9th president of SUNY Oneonta on September 6, 2021. President Cardeye has made clear his belief in the transformative role of public higher education, his commitment to equity, and a strong sense of optimism about the potential that future generations hold to continue to improve our world. As president, his first goal is to work with every constituency to foster a nurturing community that prioritizes inclusion, health, and wellness. Please welcome President Alberto Cardeye.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So good morning, and I hope that you all have had a wonderful time here at the CIT 25 conference. Two quick apologies. One, for being here at the last day of the conference. Just a crazy schedule week in terms of travel, so I was not able to be here at the beginning. And second, about the weather. I apologize. I did issue 2 executive orders on it, but it's hard. Maybe that's too soon, but it is a privilege to be with you, with so many colleagues and collaborators and change makers who are committed to reimagining what higher education can be, and more importantly, probably should become and must become. The topic of the conference and that you've chosen to explore is clearly not an easy one, and not one that you probably solved in the last couple of days. This idea of balancing innovation and with the essential humanity, which is at the heart of teaching and learning. I would say that as we consider new technologies and learning analytics and digital pedagogies, I know from my own experience that it is very tempting to chase what's novel immediately, the new shining object. But I think that what I really have enjoyed in at least hearing about and reading about the conference and the keynoters is this idea of the importance of pausing and asking the question, are these innovations enhancing the human experience of learning or replacing it? The 2 keynotes and the topic of the conference has had me thinking about one of the most influential books, at least for me, on higher education that I've read, and that's one called A Relationship-Rich Education by Peter Felton and Leo Lambert out of Elon University, where they remind us that at the core of the student success are relationships, not tools, not content delivery, but the bonds of trust and care that students build with faculty, advisors, staff, and peers. Their work shows us that often a single conversation, a mentoring of the moment, as they call it, or a consistent check-in can change a student's trajectory. That these are intentionally cultivated across every corner of the institutions. So the conference topic, readings that is seen of our keynoters was making me think about a little bit also the topic or what I mentioned to our graduates just this past Saturday. And I reminded them and the public that was there, sometimes more importantly, that universities are engines of discovery, right? That we expand the circle of human knowledge, asking questions, solving problems, and seeking truth. However, the paradox is that, as a quote that's accredited to Albert Einstein, that as our circle of knowledge expands, so does the circumference of darkness surrounding it. So this reminds us that every insight that we uncover, even more questions and more unknowns emerge. And that the paradox is actually the promise of higher education. That we illuminate the world not to reach an endpoint, but to better understand how much more there is to explore. And I think that taken together, your topics, everything that we know from pedagogy, the conference discussions, urge us to really continue to explore that circumference of darkness in a careful, deliberative approach. That we approach innovation not as an end of itself, but as a means to better honor now, to honor how people learn. They challenge us to make a space for empathy alongside AI, for community alongside content, and for failure as a necessary ingredient for growth alongside assessment. So I hope that as you step out of this conference, that you lean into the tensions that you all yourselves have highlighted and have identified between what we know and what we are yet to learn, between tradition and transformation, between access and complexity, between individual needs and institutional systems. Let's collectively, you, your colleagues back at your institution, the leadership back at your institution, imagine boldly classrooms that are more inclusive, technologies that amplify connection rather than replace it, and a future where human-centered learning isn't just a buzzword or a nice title for a conference, but it's the baseline from where we start. The future of education doesn't just rest on our innovations. More importantly, it rests on our collective willingness to see and support each other as people first. I want to thank you for having been part of this conference and this conversation, and more importantly, for being willing to be part of that future dialogue and discussion that will continue to expand that circumference of darkness. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pardee. Okay, next up we have Dr. Bryan Dewsbury. Bryan is an associate professor of biology at Florida International University. He is the principal investigator of the Science Education and Society Research Program, which blends research on the social context of teaching and learning, faculty development of inclusive practices, and programming in the cultivation of equity in education. He's an associate director of the STEM Transformational Institute, where he directs the Division of Transformative Education. He is also a fellow with the John N. Gardner Institute, where he assists institutions of higher education cultivate best practices in inclusive education. He is the creator and executive producer of the massive open online course called Inclusive Teaching. He is a co-editor of the book, The Norton Guide to Equity-Minded Teaching. He has led faculty development workshops in over 150 institutions across North America, Europe, and Western Africa. He is the host of the podcast Knowledge Unbound, where he interviews people who do transformational work in education across the globe. Dewsbury grew up in Trinidad and Tobago and immigrated to the United States in 1999. He received a BS in biology from Morehouse College and an MS and PhD in biology from FIU. Please help me welcome Bryan Dewsbury.
Morning.
Morning.
Good, good. I mean, if the weather's not going to be bright, I have to be, right? I have to bring the sunshine from Florida for you, as well as a presentation. So, what a big task. Glad to be here, and I wish you had a good spring. You know, teaching is a thing where you love, you put your heart and your soul in it, but then 15 weeks later, you are exhausted. And you need that time to reflect and regroup. So I trust you find that time for yourself this summer. When John and I and Nancy started to talk about what would be a good conversation to have, what I shared with them is that it would not be possible to talk about the humanity of teaching separate from the context of what's happening right now. And just don't be alarmed, right? This is not going to be a speech for, I'm not running for anything. But I think there's a reminder. We need to be reminded as to why we get up every morning and do our jobs. I think for a long time, I don't want to blame the victim here, but I think for a long time, many of us in higher education assumed that everybody understood. They understood the value proposition of this. They understood that when they sent their sons and daughters to our campuses and registered for 120 credits and got degrees, that the inherent value of that process was obvious to everyone. It was a natural next step after high school, right? How is it, my friends? Are so many of us finding ourselves on the back foot? How many of us are having to defend the meaning and quality and the value-added nature of what we do in our classrooms? So what I hope to do today is to give you with a little bit of an example. Maybe some language, some of which I'm sure you already have. But now more than ever, my friends, we have to be making this case. We have to be making this case. One of the things that I get to do is run a lot of educational development workshops. And they vary in length, right? Some are short, but some are multiple days. And the bread and butter of those workshops is the backward design of a course, right? And so the basic idea that the course has learning outcomes, and then you design activities that meet that, right? But before we get into that, I always ask participants, if you were to meet your student 20 years from now, what would you hope that person would have accomplished? What kind of person would you hope to have run into? And to this day, after 10 years, nobody has said, I really wish they would remember differential equations. Nobody has said, I really wish they remember the exact date World War I started. It's not that those details don't matter, but deep down, that's not what instructors really care about. So the knowledge economy of higher ed forces us to ask questions like, what do we want students to know? The active learning movement came along and said, no, let's actually push that. What do we want students to be able to do? I'm saying that the real question we should be asking is, who do we want students to become? Democracy is not a passive activity. Democracy takes work. It takes people who are willing to participate in it. It takes people who can disagree. It takes people who can critique. It takes people who are able to do self-correcting. And our classrooms and campuses are places where all of these skills can be practiced. I want to start by getting this clicker to work. One, you may have to move the mouse so that I want to start, okay, here we go. I want to start by telling you a little bit about my work story, all right? Because, I can't tell you, campus after campus, strategic plan after strategic plan, I'm so, if you did a word cloud of strategic plans around the country of higher ed, the word success would be like the biggest word in the mill, right? Everybody uses it, right? We all assume we know what we mean. But let's trouble that for a little bit, all right? So what you're looking at is a bench that is situated in the geographic center of Morehouse College. That's where I did my under. I arrived there on August 19th, 1999, F1 visa, student visa in hand. Thank you. I arrived there, so Morehouse College is a historically Black college. So I always laugh at this because people assume that, because I'm Black and it's a historically Black college, that you go to Morehouse because, you're Black, they're Black, it makes sense. No. I got a full right. This was an economic decision. I come from a working class family. We were just looking at the EFC, right? Like that's all that matters. I'm coming from a whole other country too, right? I'm also a first generation college student. And for those of you who are first generation college students, you understand that when you were a college student, you didn't know you were a first generation college student. Right? We talk about that stuff in conferences and write papers. The students themselves, typically, at least back in my day, didn't walk around like, that's what I am, and I understand that I can't access the hidden curriculum, and I have all these. No. You just there like everybody else, right? And one thing that I found out later, that first generation college parents do, is they stay for orientation. They stay for orientation. My son, this is not just for you. This is you, this is us, this is your grandparents, your ancestors are present at this orientation. There's a lot that went into this moment. And at the end of this orientation week, they sat me down on this bench and they said, Bryan, we've taken you as far as we can. Everything you do from here on out is up to you. It felt like a weird goodbye. I even remember the moment. I remember the exchange. I remember not really knowing what they meant. But fast forward 2 years later, I'm kind of skating by, right? Like I'm not blowing it out the water, but I'm not doing terribly. Like 3.1, 3.2, right? Second semester, sophomore year, I am told by an advisor that I should take Organic Chem 2, Physics 2, Calculus 2, Biochem and Philosophy. Oh, come on, I got an A in philosophy. The others, not so much. And the thing that cracks me up now, I mean, I can laugh now because I survived. But I remember sitting in my dorm room, at that point in the semester where you realize that you have to be damn near perfect to maybe just barely pass the class. And oh, by the way, you haven't understood anything that's been taught until now. So you now have to find a way to get perfect in the final. And I don't curve in my classes, but thank God physics and organic chem did, because the cutoff for the scholarship was 3.0. My cumulative was a 3.01. The story could have been very different. And I remember when I got the courage to call my parents the next semester and say, that was a close call. I could have lost my scholarship. And my mom in particular said, well, Bryan, we love you no matter what. If it doesn't work out, you can come home. Don't ever feel embarrassed to tell us if you're struggling. You know what they didn't tell me? Are you using metacognitive strategies when you study? You should do space retrieval, because studies have shown if you test yourself, when they say we've taken you as far as we can, what they're saying is we've spent all of our capital, financial, cultural, social, academic, just to get you to that bench. And so now we are relying on somebody on this campus to take that battle and take you to a place where you can see what success could look like. We can't even describe it for you because we haven't experienced that. Success for us, my parents, was My dad being one of 15 kids, being homeless for 3 years, my mom being given away to somebody else to raise. So just to get me to that bench, that's a victory. That is a legit victory. And part of the victory celebration, so to speak, is to imagine where else your offspring can land. I would say I only really understood the specifics of this story, like when I got into adulthood. Because first of all, I don't know how it is here culturally speaking, but the Caribbean parents, they like to not tell their kids stuff when they're kids. And then when you become an adult, they start telling the truth about their own lives. And so some stuff starts to make more sense when you're 30 versus when you're 12. But the more important take-home lesson is going to Morehouse wasn't just about getting a biology degree. Going to Morehouse wasn't just about, I wanted to do conservation research or something in conservation, and I knew a degree would get me there. Going to Morehouse was a place where opportunities were presented for me to find the thing that I would love and that would make me whole. The professor who became my mentor after that almost crisis semester was the first person to ask me, why conservation? When you look at yourself 10 years from now, what impact do you see yourself having on the world? He was leading me, without even using the words, he was leading me to find my why. Yes, he cared if I got an A in ecology. Yes, he cared if I did well in environmental studies. But he understood that success meant more than just that. So I was moved several years ago when this report came out. And I encourage you to look it up. It's a free download. A little dated now. But the summary of it is they interviewed and surveyed something like 10 or 20,000 adults in the workforce. And they asked a bunch of questions, including salary, when last you got a promotion, how engaged you are in your work. And this is just one snapshot of some of the results. And again, I encourage you to go download. But the strongest correlates of their happiness and success in the position were things that happened when they were undergrads. Tiny things. If you did an internship, if you can identify a mentor. Nobody reported, if I remember, the specifics of DNA regulation. Please hear me out. I'm not saying the specifics don't matter. But I'm saying that the things that we do today to invest in students' humanity pays off in the long term. One of the challenges that we have right now in higher ed, especially as it comes to assessment, we are not set up to capture this kind of information in the time frame where we measure things. So we are generally interested in retention rates, 4-year and 6-year graduation rates, give back rates, end of semester a grade distribution. All of these things are important, but it may not necessarily tell you the impact of some of those humanist approaches, how they might impact that student in the long term. So my point is, if we have to make the case, as you are trying to do with this conference, that leaning into a more humanist approach to education matters, then the way in which you document that impact needs to become more sophisticated. It can't just tie back to, and then they graduate faster. Like I want them to, but it can't just be that. It can't just be that, then they switch majors less. No, it has to be something much longer term than that. So I want to use that to maybe have a little bit of a conversation about how we think about success. Maybe it's because when I was growing up, for whatever reason, I loved dystopian novels. I loved Animal Farm. I had to do a book report on that at age 11. I love 1984. Didn't think I'd Didn't think I'd be here debating words, but I am. My PhD was actually in marine ecology and ecological economics. So some of these words I know in a different context. I did 6,000 dives in Miami, Florida. I studied seagrass leaves and all the nutrient patterns in the beds and the fish that fed on the seagrasses. And so in ecology, when we talk about diversity, we talk about it as a strength. We understand that when you have different organisms in a system that are doing different roles, the overall ecosystem is much more productive. That's why it always baffled me when people would call me and say, Bryan, can you come and give a keynote or run a workshop? We're having diversity issues. How is the diversity an issue? What did they do that makes it an issue for you? I know what they're trying to say. What they really are saying, without saying it out loud, is we haven't created the environments that allowed difference to thrive. But my friends, diversity in and of itself is not an issue. And the word itself just literally means an accumulation of difference. That is a non-political, that's a Webster Dictionary definition of the word. So when I walk into my classroom, I assume diversity exists. And maybe it's because I'm an international person, but I'm not just thinking black, white, Hispanic, Asian, like that. I'm not thinking census categories that gets forced onto people. I'm thinking you, your views, where you live, how you grew up, your religion, your ideology, your points of views in life, your hobbies, your work patterns. And I think of it not just as it's great to have it, right? This is not like the United Colors of Benetton poster, remember? Like all the different complexions. Look how we are, everything is here. Like, no, it's not just a word salad. There's an opportunity for real engagement to happen. So while there is value of Bryan, PhD, professor of bio, coming here with my experience to go through his curriculum and show you how wonderful biology is and how it brings meaning to our lives, there's also so much that other person in your group who grew up in Southern Idaho, who grew up in Alabama, who grew up somewhere else, when I give you the right kind of assignment, the right kind of prompt, when you all engage with each other, you are going to learn just as much from that person. That is part of the education experience. And lastly, we do this partly because I wonder when you leave, when you go on to have great jobs and great lives, that you have, from my classroom, from my campus, formative experience in what deliberative democracy looks like. You see, I don't want to blame the victim here, but I hope during this time that we're all looking in the mirror and realizing that we have to reclaim this narrative. We can't allow ourselves to get pigeonholed as out of touch and elitist. Wherever those criticisms are correct, it is what it is, right? But we have to reclaim the narrative that what we're doing here is a public service. That these students are going to go on to become parents, community members, churchgoers, business leaders, politicians. And you can't just sit here and rely on your Gen Ed program to teach them the value of participation. You can't wait for the MLK breakfast to depend on that, to say that's how we introduce them to Black history. We can't wait for Res Life to organize a dialogue event for them to learn what it means to talk across difference. We can't wait for others to do the job for us. So in other words, we need professors to be doing something more expansive than simply, I'm the person who knows all this stuff. I'm sorry, my friends. At some point, you might be a YouTube channel away from being out of a job. We really have to ask ourselves, what is the value added of having students physically show up that they cannot get if they didn't? So I want to use my favorite class. How many in this room teach an intro class of any type? All right, quite a number of you. And those of you who do, understand that that's a special, special place. I love all the classes I teach, but intro to me is really some of the heart and soul of the joy of teaching. I just love every September, all the new students coming, awkward as hell, just trying to college, right? Do you sit up front? Do you sit in the back and act all cool? Do you like things I see it, it's all good. And what they are, well, part of why it's such a joyful thing for me is they are also a catalog of very complex psychologies. And the most important thing is they don't even understand what's happening inside their brain as they're trying to college. We have to remember that when we use some of the language that we've used I'm sure you've used over the last 3 days. You use that language, right? You talk about sense of belonging and stereotype threat and identity contingencies and all of this stuff. There is literally not a student in this country who will walk up to you and say, "Professor, I don't feel a sense of belonging in your class." I have done the research, and you have not used the evidence-based strategies that align with. So teaching is about being able to read the subtitles. Because even though they may not say that, they may say other things or do other things that is communicating to you that is what's happening. I'll give you an example. This happens pretty much every semester, every time I teach this class. Third, fourth day of class. "Professor, I think I might switch. I don't think I'm cut out for biology." Why? Well, you asked that question in class and John got it correct. So your sample size is 1. Well, but everybody else nodded along, so that means they know it. No, that doesn't mean anything. They're not. That's what they do. Students are the best nodders on the planet. Like once somebody says anything with any degree of confidence, the nods automatically begin. As if to reassure you, don't call on me to verify that. Just keep going. But I know what he's really saying. Right? That one, John's confidence in answering the question, and John, I hope you're confident, but John's confidence in answering the question fueled that something in their brain. They were already feeling, do I belong here? If I can't keep up with the professor, does that mean is this how it will be for the whole semester? And if I don't see that for what it is, I can just say, well, this is a hard class. You should apply yourself, right? Just put some extra time into studying. I say, now, let's take a walk. And let's talk about that thing you think you don't understand. It's about reading the subtitles. I love the bio, right? I have 3 degrees in it, so obviously I like it at least a little bit. But I love the class more because of the intro. So I want to, using the subcomponents of success I discussed, I want to talk to you a little bit. And if I had to talk about intro bio, we'll be here all day, right? So I want to just focus in on 3 things. On what diversity and dialogue and civic participation means in an intro bio things. And the reason why I really want to use this example, because a lot of times in STEM and in science, the thing I always get is, but Bryan, we have all this stuff to cover, and I know where that comes from culturally. At the end of this, I'll talk to you about some success that we had in cutting a lot of content. But I want to make it very, very clear that we did cut content to make sure that we have time to do some of the things I'm going to describe. All right? So, like I mentioned, it's not good enough. It's not, I'm happy that it's a diverse class in every sense of the word. But I understand, because teaching is a skill, it's an art, it's a science. I understand that because I'm not teaching biology, I'm teaching students. Please note the difference. I'm teaching students, not biology. That with diversity comes, and with especially the intro level, comes a lot of psychological processes that are happening. And if I don't step in and interrupt them early, they can build on themselves. I understand how little things in the class, in the syllabus, in the campus can start cueing to people, you know, is this really for me? So I spent a lot of time and energy essentially blowing up whatever perception students had of a college science class where you sit there passively and you stare at me and I summarize slides 3 days a week for 15 weeks. That this is super hard and I'm here to get you and only the few and the proud will survive, and that I'm a challenge to solve and that you're competing with each other. We pick all of that stuff off one by one. People assume that because I went to Morehouse, again, I love Morehouse, I'm not hating on it. But they assume because it was an HBCU, that it was just inclusion and steroids, right? But I had a biochem, that same semester, the biochem professor, first day of class, 90% of you will fail. He was right. I'll give him that. He was lying to us. I took that 3 times, got a C, I remember nothing. He was right. Right? I got to look to the left, look to the right speech and freshman orientation, right? So I know what the culture is out there, what it can be. So we say, look to your left, look to your right. That person might become your study partner. The one to your left might become your roommate in the spring. The one behind you will open his own clinic. The one in front of you might switch majors and be a psychologist. This is not the Hunger Games, y'all. This is your first step to the rest of your lovely journey in biology. And I say we because I always use learning assistants, undergraduate. Our job here is to make sure that you get to a point where you see the power of your own potential. That's our job, that's our charge. It may not happen on the first day, the second day, the third day, but that's the challenge we take on. And sometimes it means for some of you, we may have to get in your face a little bit. That's an aggressive way. But just because we know what it takes to get past some of the monsters in your head. And so we can repurpose some of the typical language that you have. Like most, classes have, University of X has tutoring services. If you need extra help, go to that building at the edge of campus with cobwebs and ghosts, and then you'll get it. Some students have actually told me that when they hear that, what they're thinking is that there's some of us in here who can come Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just come to class and be fine. And it's the weak and the unprepared and the unworthy of us who must make their way shamefaced to that building to admit our poverty. Here's how we state that same information. Biology is a very technical discipline. And the thing with technical disciplines, it's necessarily technical because biologists need a way to talk to other biologists. And that when we talk to each other in a technical way, it helps us discover more things. This is what I actually tell them, by the way. It helps us discover more things. We have a common language. But if you're coming into the discipline, if you're coming into the subject, not an expert yet, but you're going to become one, right? The language may sound off-putting or foreign to you, right? But the only way to get comfortable with that language, it's like a foreign language, Spanish, French, whatever. The only way to get comfortable with it is to spend as much time in the environment where the language is spoken. So I have you for 3 days, but here are the opportunities for you to be in that environment. Here's where the tutoring office is, and I have former students who work there. Here are my office hours, which I call student hours. Here's where the LAs hang out. I've described the exact same thing, but I have A, phrased it as an opportunity, and B, described it as a normal process of getting good at something. It's not for the bright kids, it's not for the weak kids, it's not anything special. It's part of how you get good at this. So, set the tone for what the entire class culture is going to be like. And I do more than that. That was just an example. So if you want to think of the class as a kind of a macro level, the groups, when we put them in groups, that's more of a micro level. And group work is one of those things where if you read any active learning paper ever, they would likely mention group work as a thing that's active, and that's a very good thing to do. And I agree with that. But I also think it could be way more than that. My classes now are a little bit smaller, like 40. But for 7 years, my classes were 155 to 250. All of them were run in groups of 4. Before the class began, I manually created groups to ensure that the members of those groups were very different. Ethnically, geographically, high schools they came from. And I wanted that for the reasons I explained before. I wanted you I wanted the likelihood of a highly different opinion to be present in the group that you're in. So now that I've created that scenario, the mechanism by which those different opinions will come out will depend on the nature of the assignment. So if I just gave you, I don't know, 10 math questions to solve or something with no real direction other than that, a lot of times the person who's most motivated will be happy to just do it all and turn it in because they just want to get it done. And there is some technical problem sets like that, right? But again, this is intro bio. Sometimes they're writing opinion pieces, right? We do an example, for those of you who don't know, the discovery of DNA was partly based on stolen data. And the person whose data was stolen wasn't given credit until after she died. And so there's this lovely case study we use where each member of the group plays the role of the 3 male scientists involved and the 1 female scientist whose data was taken. And they write opinion pieces on each of their roles. They look at data sets like the lead levels of children's blood from Flint, Michigan, from 6 years ago. And they put themselves as town managers and as advisors to the mayor. Like, if you had to be part of the team trying to solve this problem, right? What are the things you would be bringing up? So the nature of the assignments forces them into some difficult conversation. So I can't just be like, you know, it's gonna be a tough one, y'all, don't fight. I take as a given that many of them may not have ever had those kinds of conversations in a classroom. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what does it mean to have respectful, difficult dialogue. I did difficult dialogue training in Mississippi some years ago. And we use something which I use in class called guideposting. And what it is a list of statements, the goal of which is to set the cultural environment around which respectful discussion can happen, right? And we talk about this openly, right? So it's 9 statements and they say things like, respect silence. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. No fixing. Everyone has a right to speak their truth. And we discuss it, and sometimes, the students say, Professor, I think we should change the wording on a couple of these because I think we should have some red lines. Okay, right, let's talk through that. But the point is at the end of that discussion, we collectively understand that when you get into some conversations, it's not going to be easy. That you may hear things or read things that you'll feel that visceral reaction bubbling up in you. And you have to be able to walk past that and say, I wonder what brought him to that opinion. I wonder what brought him to this place. I wonder how their lived history made them see this in this particular way. Because once the temperature is raised, once it becomes a screaming match, then it's hard for you to have a rational, reasonable conversation. What I'm saying to you is, I don't do this just because it's an active thing. I'm not doing this because if I put students in groups of 4, it makes my grading easier. This is part of what I mean about you have to learn to talk and do difficult things with people you disagree. That is the essence of science. That's the essence of the falsification process, is a continuous process of self-correction. And so the diversity to me is only as valuable as the degree to which you can work together to find new meaning. The word dialogue, the etymology of the word dialogue is finding meaning through words. It's not just being in conversation. It's not, look how cool it is we're talking. It's not just that. You're actually trying to find new meaning. Last but not least, let me give this a little context. The Enlightenment was a very interesting time in our history. And I know there are some issues with it, so I'm not here to debate all of it. But certainly here in 2025, it's hard for us to conceptualize the late 1700s, when you go from, as a citizen, you do whatever the king tells you to do, when to plant, when to fight, when to go to school, to this process by which you actually get to ask questions and collect evidence to determine if something makes sense or doesn't make sense. So you can trace this line of thinking from John Locke's work on treaties of government to Thomas Jefferson, whose library was filled with John Locke's writing, to his statement in the Declaration of Independence that says, we submit these truths to a candid world. A lot of people think of the Enlightenment as just a scientific thing. Yes, there is a big scientific enlightenment, but it also partly informed how we organize a society. Part of when he said, we submit these truths to a candid world, it's like, look, man, we're gonna try this 13 colony independence thing. We're gonna get a lot wrong, probably, including whatever he did with his slaves, but it was supposed to be an over time iterative process of self-correction. So, as Jill Lepore likes to talk about in her book, These Truths, to be born into a democracy is to be born with an assumption that you are going to participate. That you do the reading, That you read the articles, you look up the evidence. You don't just accept when somebody on a TV screen who's dressed nicely yells at you about a complicated issue and gives you a soundbite so you can repeat to a friend at a social party. No, you have agency in this. Paulo Freire calls it critical consciousness. And so it's not just about doing the reading and how you think about it, it's practicing those behaviors right now. So for example, that what you're reading at the bottom of your screen, we chant that every Monday morning, like a cult. You do not know something until you can explain it to your roommate. Why? Because what will happen is, Bryan tries to dress nicely, he has a PhD, he's a professor, he has a grade book. So let me listen exactly to what he says and furiously write down what he says verbatim. So when that question comes in the exam, if I can just repeat the exact same thing, I know that's my path to a good grade. And nowhere in that process is that ownership of the information, right? So the students will come to my office, Professor, I didn't quite understand, what you just explained in class today. Can you go it over again? Sure. I explain it again, and I say, well, okay, do you understand it now? Yeah, that was good. All right, go to my whiteboard and explain it back to me. I'm not gonna test you on how well you can agree. I'm gonna test you on how well you can explain things. And when I say explain, I mean explain in a way that you are the expert. You can take questions about it. Even if you don't have all the answers, but it pushes your mind to clarify things. Because what happens at this level, have you all ever heard the term code dumping? Back in the 70s, when computers were like 3 stories of a building, mainframe computers, if something went wrong with the computer, it would print its entire hard drive on sheets of paper. So the technicians on the 4th floor would know something's wrong because they would hear rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat. And that process was called code dumping. It also describes how a lot of first-year students sometimes write short answers. If I could just write everything I remember from page 19, a random assortment of definitions and things, somewhere in there I should get partial credit. Nope. We're not just dumping from the brain to the sheet. We are going to give a clear, cogent explanation. And the reason why I'm such a stickler for that is when you leave my class, I have you for 15 weeks. I'm not going to be next to you when you study for your next class. I don't want you to rely on authority, right? For you to have confidence in knowing what you're knowing. In a roundabout way, I'm trying to teach you metacognition. How do you really know that you know something? So this is why I don't do multiple choice. I'm not against it. But we spend most of our classroom time practicing fully answering a question. And my hope is, as you mature and matriculate into other parts of your lives, when you buy things in the grocery, when you listen to politicians and trying to decide your vote, when you're looking for a partner, when you're hearing information, that you approach that process with a critical mindset. That you ask follow-ups. When they say 2 or 3 doctors says this pill works, was it 3 doctors? Was it 300 doctors? That's 2 very different amounts, 2 very different statements. When you get the articles, the op-eds that sound so confident, and then you click on that little hyperlink where they base the information, where they base their opinion from, and you're like, wait a second, how did you get that from that? You learn to do that. I'm not trying to make you a conspiracy theorist, just trying to make you a thinker. This slide is 10 years old. So this slide predates all of this nonsense. And I like that I still show it because it reminds me, and I guess I would like to remind you, that the goal of all of this, the goal of everything I've written, talk about, run workshops on, the goal was never inclusion. It sounds like a provocative thing to say, but let me give you a good corollary. In the 1960s, in the Civil Rights era, when SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, did the Get Out the Vote campaign in Mississippi, Alabama. If you read the book, Radical Equations, Bob Moses will tell you, the goal wasn't to get out the vote. The goal was to change the power structure. Getting out the vote was a mechanism to make that happen. And the problem is, if you get stuck in a mechanism, you forget what you're really after. The goal wasn't inclusion. The goal is student success. The goal is to make sure everyone who walks into that campus and that classroom has an opportunity for that success. Inclusion was something we noticed and we realized wasn't happening. And if we can solve that piece, then this 30% of this class don't have to leave with Fs. This 40% doesn't have to switch majors and run away from the university because nobody was thinking about their belonging. But the goal has always been student success. So when I talk about things like inclusive teaching, inclusive education, it's not a type, right? It's not a separate brand of it that must have now these 10 things because now you're inclusive, you do these 10 things. No. I want good and effective teaching, a good and effective and high quality education experience to be defined as one that is inclusive. If it's good, it's inclusive, period. I'm not making a differential anything between the two. Because when that happens, then you can start answering questions like what John Dewey asked us 100 years ago. What is our public service mantra? How are we preparing people to be part of this economy, of this society? How are we teaching them values of love and being in service of others and tolerance? Or are you just assuming it happens because, I don't know, we have a student affairs department that runs programs? You know, I'll close with this. Several years ago, when I was at the University of Rhode Island, which was wonderful by a couple of things. One, I was hired as a discipline-based education researcher, right? So my training is in biology, but I do education research. And to some people, what that meant is that you're a teaching specialist. I was like, well, I teach just like you teach, but I also do education research. And what would happen, what happened at the time was the hope for this position was to help them solve a lot of the struggles they were having, particularly in intro STEM. So what was said is, Bryan, students are failing intro, well, let's pick on bio for a second. They're failing intro bio 35%, 40%. And the first thing I noticed with how that's phrased is, well, how that's phrased. Because if you're telling me that students are failing, then the way that sentence is set up, you've only given yourself two options to solve the problem. Either you fix the students or you get different ones. But if you said, we are having a lot of success at the intro level in biology, then the follow-up question is, well, what does success mean? Well, okay, we need to at least get more students to pass the class. Okay, follow-up question, why is that not happening? Well, there's some challenges with students learning how to study, but also maybe the teaching isn't very good yet. You had to be willing to put that on the table as a possible reason. I know Harriet is not set up to do that kind of, self-critique. But I'm sorry, if 80% of the class got question 6 wrong, it might be the question. It might be you didn't teach it well. That's a real legit reason. So we didn't, I wasn't there to proselytize and be the Pied Piper kind of person. So it's like, look, believe in our methods, looked at this 50 chapter curriculum I was handed. I was like, okay, we need to do some things here, right? So we cut 35% of what we got, and we can talk later about what that looked like. Because we wanted to make space to actually do biology, to write, to engage, to solve things, to get confused, to do math, to have an experience. And what was 35%, I think in a couple of years, the unproductive grade rate went down to 6%. And it remained at 6%. And so then, as you can imagine, the pushback then is, well, you inclusive people just making the class easy, right? So that one before, just giving away grades like hotcakes, right? And actually, I mean, of 155 students, my grade A's were maybe 12, 13 students, right? I had a lot of them bunching up at the B+ C range, but of course, if they are right, then there's an ethical issue with that, because if I'm just making the class easy, then they should fall flat on their face when they go into the second semester of the intro class. So we worked with the Office of Institutional Research and we tracked them, right? There were 4 sections. My section is 35% reduction. And then there's 3 fire hose sections, right? All of the content, all the chapters, everything. And all 4 sections, all who are successful, go into the second semester into 2 sections of Intro Bio 2, right? So we were able to look at the students as they came in from each section and compare their grades. Because it would stand to reason, if Bryan is being unethical, then my section should come in here and just combust. Not only were their second semester grades significantly better than these 3, when they went into their sophomore year, that gap actually widened. Here's the thing. A lot of times when you write papers as an academic, what reviewers want to see is p-values and maximum likelihood, and that's fine. They should want to see that. But what I want you to take away from this is those students in another semester would have been told that you're not good enough for this class, that you need to apply yourself, that maybe you're just not a right fit for this major. If you just, double down, those same students who would have been part of the 35% and now are not just past the class but going on to be successful, they would have been communicated something entirely different. So yes, this paper is about grades, but the big thing is, what kind of teaching strategies are we leaning into to give our students a chance to be successful? If you were like me, of my generation and before, likely none of you actually got trained in actual teaching. It's one of the biggest criminal enterprises of this country that I don't know how we haven't been found out yet. I don't know. I mean, have you ever wanted to tell your students, I never learned to do this? So let's just figure this out as a team, right? And so now we can kind of workshop our way on the back end. And I'm glad that we're investing in things like this. But we have to solve the problem at the root. We have to think about how graduate students are being trained who choose to go to become faculty. 19-year-old Bryan had no idea that 45-year-old Bryan would be in front of you telling this story. And when I look back to that 4 years I spent at Morehouse College, my success, and by success I mean I graduated, wasn't because of the science classes, right? My mentor, who became my mentor, yes, he was an ecology professor, but the classes that really mostly inform my thinking now came from the ones that forced me to read Huckleberry Finn with a critical eye, to read Du Bois with a critical eye, that that asked me questions of myself. Like I grew in ways I couldn't understand back then. And I think we have the skills, the talents, the willingness, the desire to take 10 steps back and get back into that way of thinking about our classrooms. Because you all know I live in Florida, right? We need your help more than ever. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions for Bryan while he's still here with us? The last few minutes. Are you open to questions? No, that I have.
What circumstances are we okay and say, no, I'm not open for questions?
You know your questions. Sacrifice them under a phone. I don't know. Anybody have anything?
I say only way in the back?
Oh, yes.
Icebreaker. So, to define what is success, everybody has also their own definition. And I'm pretty happy to hear your definition. And a lot of people now think that being happy and being healthy and generating toward that way is the success. And also be able to empower students to make their decisions that impact their own, others, and the world. So in your context, what do you think, you mentioned about diversity, you mentioned about inclusion, dialogue, and also how to embrace. So how would you relate that? Do you want to say that we should generate people to be healthy and happy also?
Yes, lots of questions in there. So I'll tackle the last one. I did love that the report I referenced is called Great Drugs, Great Lives, because, and I understand we're in a capitalist economy, so finances matter, so I don't want to abscond that, right? But we are certainly finding out more and more that people want more than just high salaries and status positions to feel a sense of happiness. So to get back to your original question about how I define it, I will precede that by saying, I define teaching as the ability for me to lead a student from their current place of readiness to a place where they can see their true potential. That's how I define the act of teaching. And I'm preceding the question by saying that because for me, success is once they see their true potential, that's a place where they have agency over their life choices. So life choices might be I go on to get a very high-earning type of career. Life choices might mean I want to travel the world and not ever get married. But for me, the important thing is to have agency throughout that process. And keep asking the question, what are the things that make you happy, but also makes others happy as well? But before that can happen, I need you to get into a place for you to see the power of that agency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question in front.
In your discussion, you ended up talking about how you need to teach the student, not the content.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a librarian, so me going in, I usually only get like a one-shot kind of setup. And for me, it's really hard to get in because there is this bearing on, oh, well, I have so much to get through in the semester. I can't get you in to go over some of the key foundational pieces like information literacy or how to read or how to search or how to process that are really integral, I think, to the well-being of the student overall.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, when you're talking with administration or you're talking with faculty members, how can you note the importance of really trying to note that the content isn't as important as the skills that the student is gaining across the board, and how making time and building in time for that is important and essential.
Yeah, I would say a few things. So that paper I showed you came from the university, when I was at the University of Rhode Island. And, you know, again, overall, I had a good time, right? But, you know, there were some microaggressions, there was some stuff, right? And some of the few negative things that happened came from a place of faith, in my view, right? I think it's helpful that I'm an optimist. It's a little hard these days, but in general, I am, right? And so when people react negatively sometimes to discussions like this, I take a Father forgive them for they know not what they do type of approach, right? Like, because I think they're not really mad at me, right? But they are scared, because when, you know, if you come and say you could be more effective by teaching in this way, sometimes what the person is hearing is, well, are you telling me I was a racist for the last 20 years? Like, they may not say that to you, but that's the thing that's driving the emotional reaction, right? So when we were doing this, when we redesigned the class and everything, we didn't tell them, you know, oh, you have to do what I do, and the papers say this, and no. Respect people's autonomy, right? And it took a good 5-6 years to really collect that data, because we had to track the students, we looked at, you know, students from before I arrived, we had to compare across sections, right? So all that time, there was just a lot of like, oh, Bryan's doing that music thing in his class, you know, whatever, like kind of a dismissive. But then when the data came out, like, because obviously if your unproductive grade goes down, your retention goes up, right? And whose attention did that get? The vice president of enrollment management, right? Because retention kind of matters to that office, right? And then once you get his attention, it gets the dean's attention, right? And so once the dean sees now local evidence of the impact of, yes, I cut the content, and they not only did better, they not only did fine, but they thrived. Now ethically, we have to start having whole department conversations about, well, is this something we can scale? So at the beginning, when at a faculty meeting, and I quote, I was told, inclusive teaching over my dead body. To 6 years later, where we were having multiple meetings a week talking about the entire redesign of the departmental curriculum, right? So a lot of this needs patience. A lot of this needs time to collect the data, and please collect the data, because that's the thing that you can make the argument with. And what some of this needs is some change theory, right? So there's a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. Really, really good book. And it talks about, you know, what do you do to get people to consider change, right? Some people need to see the data. If they don't see a p-value, don't come to the office, right? Some people needed to hear from their students who were in that class to say, I need something different than this. Like, they needed pushback from the students themselves. Some needed, quite frankly, the dean to come knock on the door and say, like, this isn't good enough anymore. Sometimes you need a little bit of flexing, right? But then eventually what happens is a beautiful thing. It happened at UBC Vancouver, it happened at UNC Greensboro, University of Houston, Valencia, where you get enough people who began approaching their classrooms in this way that they now become the critical mass, right? And you know, those who decide to kick and scream until the end, you know, become the minority. Sometimes, I hate to say it, sometimes you need retirements, right? That's part of it. But if you approach this work in the way I try to do, same with my teaching, from a place of love, and I believe in your better angels, and we do still have shared values, there are a lot more people who are willing to onboard than you might think. So it's a long, big conversation. Thanks, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Hope, SUNY Coil Center. And I know that COIL is something that happens at Florida International University. Yeah. So this critical mass of trying to get people to embrace what you're doing. You talked about when you're doing professional development with your colleagues, and what are the points of convincing or bringing people into the fold about the power of group work and having your colleagues embrace that as well as you are?
Well, a couple of things. I can give you kind of an on-campus example and an off-campus example. So off-campus meaning I do run national workshops on course design. And those workshops will have people from different campuses, right? And what we tend to do in those workshops, especially when they're longer, is we have them play the role of students, right? We give them activities where they have to, and I don't know how many of you have been to FACT2 workshops or maybe faculty meeting, but faculty are students too, right? Like they do some of the same, we complain about students, but we do some of the same stuff. And you have the same, like one person who thinks they know everything and wants to, and so in doing that, you with love and care, you sort of point out, if you approach it this way, it could be problematic for others, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things in that scenario, I realize I have to pay attention to is sometimes in academia, especially in the post-active learning period, the interactions tend to get biased towards the extroverts, right? So the person who's highly social, talks the loudest, thinks quickly, right? And as somebody who, I'm not an introvert, but it does take me a while to kind of process things. I kind of need my brain silent to really, I've been in faculty scenarios where, somebody got to the end before me, and then you actually start feeling like, well, I have a PhD too. Should I have not known that too? And so some of those same psychological dynamics happen with us as grown-ups. So there's that piece. Then on campus, where I have the privilege of proximity, I invite people to my class. Yeah, I have an open door policy. We leave one chair for Elijah, but other than that, everybody. Okay, that was a Jewish joke. Nobody got that? Anyways, so yeah, anybody can come in at any time. And because sometimes it's hard to really get, what it looks like, what it feels like until you're like physically there. And I have a really big open door policy on that. I love when people come because you never really fully understand unless you're there. Time for one more?
Real quick question, Bryan.
Yeah.
How do you change what you call it given the current political environment?
Well, we led the way,
Yeah, are you calling it differently, or are we just gonna do the work and change the way we call it, or is that where we go, or are we go on a limb, or?
Well, I'll just speak for me, because I certainly have colleagues who've done the anticipatory obedience thing, right? I have a friend who teaches real estate law. Is it law? Yeah, real estate law. And he cut out his whole redlining section. I'm like, dude, that's like half of, anyway. I'll say this, that's a good question to end on. I don't want to do the blame the victim thing, but I gotta be honest with you. As somebody who's traveled a lot and gone to a lot of campuses, a lot of times the invitations I get are around DEI and DEI adjacent things. I have seen places where it's been done badly. I have seen some carelessness. I'm not saying it's the majority. I'm not saying it was critical mass, but I know I've been to places where I left being like, oh my God, this is going to be a problem. Right? This has turned into something else, and that something else is not good. Right? And it's sad because I've been to so many other places where they increase graduation rates, they work with the community, they base their things on the they're doing it the right way. And I'm always worried that a few bad situations would then color the majority. And the places that are doing it well, and this is to your question here, are doing it, I guess, in the way I would. To me, there's nothing that I do or say in class, in my writing, that I will not be willing to defend because it's based in evidence. If we want to talk about the numbers that I'm quoting, that's one thing. But There's not a day in 12 years I've been in that class you have ever heard me say a president's name, a political party name, nothing, no, absolutely nothing, right? We can talk about the biology of skin color and the trade-off between folic acid and ultraviolet rays. Then we can talk about that French dude who made up the racial categories in the 1950s, right? We can talk about that. That's documented facts. And I'm even open with students about there's some parts of our history, scientific history, not easy to talk about. And we didn't always make the best decision. I would say on balance, we mostly made good decisions. Like we got a vaccine in like 2 weeks because of science. We live longer, healthier, children don't die at birth, women don't lose half their teeth when they were pregnant. Like, there's a lot of things we figured out. There are diseases you never heard of because of science. So I'm not a progressive fool, right? But the part of the discussion I have with them is we got better because we were willing to look at our mistakes. I'm a social science researcher who has to apply for institutional permission for every project I do because of Tuskegee, because I'm not even allowed to survey somebody unless a panel looks at my application. So one of the beautiful things about education is the capacity it gives us to be better. And that's my approach in teaching. That's my approach in writing. And so for that reason, I haven't changed anything, right? I'll just say one more quick thing to that question. I think part of it is, I'm not trying to hate on those who make this choice, right? But I've never been like, we live in a white supremacy society kind of guy, right? Like, I know what people mean when they say that. I understand the Western European influence, blah, blah, I get it. I'm not even disagreeing with it per se, right? But in the same way, I think it was your question about getting colleagues to consider change, right? When I do things like this is not about Bryan. This is not about how well I might be an orator, whatever that is. I would love people when they hear this message to think that there's something different I can leave here thinking about my classroom and the possibility that exists, right? And I know that if I lead with certain language, for some of you, that might elicit emotions that then close your ability to intake the rest of what the message is. So if my goal is to create opportunities for change to happen, then I have to leave you in an emotional space where you are willing to consider that change. And that's part of the discipline I'm talking about. Thank you so much, everyone.
So much. That was great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The mic's not working.
Just turn it
on.
It's on.
It's on, I swear. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Dewsbury. That was. So before we go, just quickly, I'd like to thank everyone who made this event possible for all of us, especially our host here at SUNY Oneonta, from President Gay. Thanks to Kim Scalzo, who always guides us to these events, and to the CPD, who all work together to pull these off. And we especially thank Nancy Matango. How this conference will be next year without Nancy. I'm sure we're gonna miss her every single day, and we'll be doing that at Stony Brook University, May 26th to the 29th. So please write that down now, and we hope to see you all again next year. Thank you.